What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Bed Boys, your one-stop shop for all your energy drink reviews and performance talks. I'm Christian,
Brian?
and we are the Bed Boys. Today, we got another banger episode for you, as usual. Getting us started off here, I'm about to pop top. I've been fiending. I got a C4 Jolly Rancher flavor, and this is the Blue Raz variant. So we've had these on the show before. Oh, dripping all over my computer. We've had these on the show before. I think we've tried damn near every flavor, right? Blue Raz, green apple, watermelon. I believe there's a peach now.
There's
I don't
a
think
peach now.
I don't think I've tried that
That's
one. And then
yeah.
is that it? I remember it was the original three was the green watermelon and then the blue one. Did they ever make a grape flavored
I
one?
don't
Can't
I don't think they
remember.
made a grape or like a cherry one.
No.
Let me see here.
But really big fan of these Jolly Rancher C4s. They did the flavor really well. So
Yeah, I mean that's hard to kind of beat. There is a peach as of now.
yeah, I
So
don't
it,
think I've tried
the
that one.
the four flavors are blue raz, watermelon, peach, and green apple. The green apple is very possibly one of the best flavors C4's ever put out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the green apple is my favorite of the Jolly Rancher flavors, and then this Blue Raz is a close
I
second.
guess solid number 2.
Yeah. Speaking of flavor collabs, I just noticed, obviously, Ghost is no longer doing the Sour Patch Kids flavors. You might be able to find them. Like, there might be a few left, but they're no longer producing them. I did see that Sour Patch partnered up with Abe, applied a new brand called ABE, essentially partner energy drink, and they're doing Sour Patch flavors: watermelon, red berry, and blue raspberry. So that'll be interesting with the watermelon. I have never heard of this brand before. It's ABE. I think the company is Applied Nutrition. So they're making a 200 milligram of caffeine drink, 12-ounce can, unfortunately. But if you've been fiending for the Sour Patch Kids flavor, it is being produced just by another company.
I just don't know. Like, how do you feel about this? Like, this is a deal with like Mondelez, obviously, but I think for a certain, it's almost, I don't know how to, like, I get business. It almost feels like it's too early to just get back into the game with somebody else. Like, this was already in the midst, once that first deal kind of got broke. Also, ugly can.
Yeah, not a huge fan of the can. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's is it Sour Patch Kids and their holding company reaching out to garner offers, or is it the other way around? Is it the drink company reaching out? Hey, I heard you just broke it off with Ghost. Want to get with us?
Yeah.
I don't know how that goes, but at the end of the day, they're probably making a lot of money off it and want to continue to make money off it. So I don't know, a new suitor, if you will, for the Sour Patch Kids.
Yeah. Where did you do your courtship?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like,
but
extra caffeine Pepsi. Sorry, I'm just seeing this right now.
I just saw an extra caffeine Dr. Pepper. So when I was looking up the flavor on this, that populated. But that, and then Red Bull kind of with a questionable release for their winter edition. Pistachio and berries is the Red Bull winter flavor that comes out in November. I've always trusted Red Bull. I don't want my energy drink to taste like a nut.
Pistachio is very interesting. I love like a pistachio ice cream.
Don't get me wrong.
If I ever
Do
get
my
like a
chocolate?
latte of coffee, pistachio latte once in a while, if I want something sweet. But I really like pistachios themselves as well. I don't know about it in a carbonated drink, though. Not sure how I feel about that one.
Like, it's like the drink has to be thick and like a creamy, thick drink to have nut in it.
Yeah, it doesn't go well with like thin carbonated. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It just,
I just,
but we'll see.
that's, it could be really good. I'm not going to hold my breath. Red Bull's always, like I said, Red Bull's always came through with flavorings, but if there's going to be one that they kind of flop on, I feel like it would be a pistachio flavored energy drink. Now,
Yeah,
I do think that people should make a pistachio flavored like protein bar. That would be really good.
yeah. I'm surprised they haven't done that with all the Dubai chocolate craze
Yeah,
recently.
you would think that there would have populated like a Dubai chocolate like protein bar.
Yeah, and they'd be $17 a pop.
Yep, and it only have 6 grams of protein in it.
Yeah, I'm not. I feel like someone has to have done this.
I haven't seen one. We do have one more flavor release. This one is a little bit more pitiful. And it's not because of the brand. Um, Gorilla Mind is releasing a traditional fruit punch flavor, which for a lot of people, they're going to love that idea. For anyone who is so sick of the fruit punch craze of 2006 just lasting 20 years, hand up, that's me. Not huge on that. But of course, I will try it. I will review it. Just like I have been saying, I will try and I will review the 7 Up Ghost that gets into my fridge and doesn't make it past 2 days.
Yeah, I'm not super excited for the fruit punch flavor, but most of their other flavors are pretty banging. So if there's someone that's going to do a fruit punch flavor well,
You can
it's
trust
probably
them
going to
on
be Gorilla
that.
Mind. Yeah,
Yeah. But enough about this and enough about that. We got a couple things to talk about today.
yeah. Let's get it cracking right away. I want to talk about, wrote down autonomy versus systems. And this is something I've kind of been thinking about. I think it relates to work, really, in any sector, and in like creativity. I think a lot of times you need both. So autonomy, the ability to kind of like do what you want with your time, whether it's your free time, whether that's at work on certain projects that you find interesting, stuff like that. And then systems. So processes that you're supposed to follow, kind of giving you, thinking about like thinking inside the box. It gives you kind of direction. And I think if you have only autonomy with no systems, I think that can be problematic. And I can also see it the other way being problematic with just strictly systems, processes, but little to no autonomy. Um, what got me thinking about this primarily is I'm listening to an audiobook right now. It's called Thinking in the Box. It's the same guy that wrote the book Range. If you've ever heard of that book, that's a really good book as well. I think it's Daniel Epstein. And the book, the book actually, no relation. The book kind of goes into detail about, okay, it's thinking inside the box, how constraints can help make us better. And essentially it's like the main premise is if people aren't given any constraints, if they're not given a so-called box to think inside of, we end up either doing nothing because it's like, oh, like the possibilities are literally endless. We're like, damn, I could do literally anything. And that becomes a little bit too overwhelming. And then we end up either doing nothing at all, or we usually just tend to do, take the path of least resistance. Because like, okay, I can literally do anything, but you have no really direction to follow because you don't have any of those constraints and or systems, as we're going to talk about here. And you just tend to go either fall back on what you know and what is familiar to you, or you tend to take the path of least resistance. So I kind of just want to riff on like, how can we have a balance of both, really, in whether that's in coaching, in work, and kind of the value of those constraints. Because I think oftentimes we think of constraints as almost inherently negative, and I don't think it has to be that way. I think they can be positive as well.
I think to a certain extent, there has a really good system will have sorry, a really good like organization Like if we think about it in terms in the sports performance space, there are systems in place at these organizations, but there's a ton of autonomy within these systems and around them, right? And we want to systemize things that you don't need to constantly think about to alleviate the mind to have creativity in the things that there should be autonomy. If you don't have systems in place whatsoever at all, it becomes an open landscape almost to the effect of the instead of thinking of it in time, but more so it becomes Parkinson's law in space, where instead of the task will take the full time that's allotted, it's that your brain will try to take up all of the bandwidth of thinking in all the different ways because there's no bounds for it to kind of confide in. And so I think there has to be systems in place, but you cannot in any way, shape, or form just go, well, we run our system, right? How many times have, maybe in an internship or you came across somebody at a conference or just a conversation with a coach and they just tell you like, well, this is our system. This is what we do here. Right. And then every team is the same clone because every coach is going to coach the exact same way. At what point does it nullify the athletes and their athletic development? But number two, what if you have a great coach on staff who's willing to kind of like quote unquote break the bounds and want to change things up to make a better program, but instead 22 teams have the same exact program regardless of whatever sport they play, and I think there's a little bit of that no matter what. And personally, I see it a lot more in all honesty, you can see it a lot more in like Olympic staffs. I think in like a football staff, you'll see a carbon copy usually of like the head strength coach as the underlings, just as that's how that goes because they spend so much time with each other. But I think the over systemization is a little bit more in the Olympic side than you see anywhere else, at least in the college sector. High school is a little different just because it's usually like one, maybe two coaches, and then professional. It has to be very systematic, but it's also systematic from the sport side. So it's a little bit different. But they're like, you go in there and you say, all right, you mind if I like take a look at like one of your lift cards and you see, hey, for day one, it's going to show power clean, it's going to show back squat, and then they're going to have bench press, and then there's going to be a couple med ball throws or some accessories. And then you see day two and it's going to be snatch. And then if bench wasn't on that day, it's on this day, so on and so forth. Right. And it looks pretty identical. That's where I think you can get problematic when you systemize it too much. Because now you're just giving the same thing to everybody without a second thought.
I agree. And I think, like you said, it kind of depends on the setting. Like, for example, when I was at Simpson, like a lot of teams, not a lot of coaches, as it is at a lot of like smaller schools. I feel like we did a pretty damn good job. I feel like Sam did a really good job of, okay, we have to find like the way our systems are going to work because we think about, okay, every team has 45 minutes to an hour. We have 20 plus teams on campus that all need to train throughout the week. I think the workouts may look similar as far as like structure, but it was never the same program for any two teams. It might be similar for like, okay, like a men's and women's basketball, but like the structure, okay, we know we can only fit in X amount of work in 45 minutes or, X amount of work if it's an in-season lift in 30 minutes. That structure can look the same, the way you kind of like lay out the lift card, but then the methods and the exercise selection can kind of vary, and that gives you kind of that autonomy versus just like, and I think that's helpful if you just give someone kind of like a blank sheet of paper, tell them,
So you make a lift.
Right, which like you can do that when you're a little bit more experienced, but even then, like I think we would all do better just like, okay, like here's kind of how I'm thinking, general layout, like even give you a couple like ground rules and then make a lift a lot easier. And I think you'll spend a lot less time. You'll spend more time actually thinking about how the program is going to flow versus and less time being like, oh damn, like I can literally do anything. Like I said, it can kind of get almost like overwhelming, and then you just kind of end up falling back on what's most familiar to you, instead of thinking like, okay, this is kind of the general structure. Okay, this is why I want to like attack it and get into the specifics.
What would you
So
say would be the three most important things to have a system in place for, and then vice versa, the three most important things to have autonomy for? Whether that let's put it in the sports performance sector.
that's a good question. I think one that comes to my mind immediately is like an exercise, like terminology, and like specifically with like exercises that everyone can kind of like agree on. I feel like they did this really well at Simpson and at like Elon. I think it just saves a lot of time and confusion, just with like, okay, you can have 5 different coaches that call the same exercise 5 different things. And I think that's something where it's like you might not think it's a huge deal, and it probably isn't, because if smart people can figure it out. But if one person's gone and the other person's running that person's program for their team, and they're like, oh, I call this, all right, we'll do this, and then they end up doing the wrong exercise. And over time, like I think that can kind of add up. So stuff like that, where it's like common just terminology, where you can all be on the same page, speaking the same language, I think that can clear up a lot of confusion. That's one thing where I think like a system in place, because especially like you do it once, and then if it's in something like whatever you're using, team builder, bridge, train heroic, like you can all build like exercise menus and libraries within those, and then they're saved, and then you don't have to do that. You don't have to worry about doing that again. I think like just like a general list of like however many people are on your staff, whether it's 2 or 10, like having responsibilities of the day to day and the week to week, so that like, okay, I know this is going to get cleaned, on these days. This person's doing this, at the end of, this day. That way, if something, all your daily responsibilities are kind of taken care of, because that's stuff that's like, it's usually not very hard to do, but it needs to be done. Like it's just kind of those tedious tasks, and then they can really kind of be like a pain in the ass if you don't take care of them. And it's like, damn, like we should have like done this before. It's like easy stuff where if you just take care of that, it's not gonna like, it'll just save you a lot of like unneeded stress. It's not going to be like groundbreaking work, but it's stuff where it's just going to be like kind of off your plate. Third, ooh, it's gonna be tough thinking of a third one. Those are my big 2. I think really just, I think coaches should all have their own kind of like style of like programming and like philosophy, but especially like within a department, I think it's wise to kind of agree on like a general philosophy and general like principles, and kind of have everyone on the same page with that. I don't know if you could really categorize that as a system or not,
In a
but I
way, you
think that,
probably could.
yeah, I think that just like leads into more of
Just
the
kind of
actual like more of the actual like nuts and bolts. Like, okay, like we say, like principles, like methods are many, but principles are few. If we all kind of like agree on those general principles, okay, then we can kind of use personal preference for methods and stuff like that. But it's not
yeah.
just all haphazardly at random.
So basically, what I got from you talking about systems, the constraints make the day to day easier because it's less thinking on that, where we can spend the time in the creative act of doing what we do best. And I think systems in place are the best things, and having those boundaries or quote unquote constraints in the administrative, the day to day, the more monotonous tasks. If you can systemize that to where you're not spending mental bandwidth on it, I think that's going to be the most important thing when you're somewhere, whether that is just knowing that it's an exercise menu or a database of the exercise that you use. And you know that you're always going to go anatomical, then implement, then movement, right? And now whoever comes in, they can come right in and assimilate without having to overthink it or mess things up. Your data becomes clean. There's that. Your secondary tasks of doing, whether it's nutrition or internship, it's the database itself and maintaining that. It's the data and the sports science role. When those are clean, it's far easier. You're not having the accumulation of tasks and destructiveness to where it will then, at some point, if you don't have that, it will then impede your day or your workflow. So the systems in place allow that to just become part of the workflow and not have to, like I said, spend mental bandwidth thinking about these things versus it just occurring and it becoming a part of what runs. And then the autonomy aspect, if I think autonomy, I would want, as a coach, as an assistant coach, as a head coach, I would want autonomy probably on these couple of things. How I write my program. I want autonomy to write my program how I see fit for that sport. I think that's huge. If you take that away from a coach and they don't have as much belief in their program, they're probably not going to coach it as well. And secondary, I would want autonomy on how I coach, whether that be a little bit more boisterous or maybe a little bit more authoritarian or more interpersonal. Like, I know there's 1,000 different coaching styles and every person's going to coach differently. So coach the way that you're comfortable and the way that you're able to coach that entire group. And then the last thing I think that autonomy should have to happen is with relationships. The athletes should have, or not the athletes, sorry, the coaches should have autonomy to structure. And I'm going to say this there is constraints in a relationship with an athlete where they believe in you as a coach. I'll say that. But like with the relationships with their sport coaches, with their personal sport administrators, if they're in the collegiate sector, with the ATs and medical doctors that they work with, they should have the autonomy to create and foster and build those relationships versus like, you guys need to meet every other day. Because sometimes, to a certain extent, I think there's like a minimum that you should hit. Like, hey, you guys should probably be meeting once a week, whether it's a peak performance meeting or just a more interpersonal conversation about whatever, 5 people may have been in and out of the AT room. When you get that cadence and that flow that really works, it becomes natural. And then by having it be autonomous, it then becomes more systematic just by the feel of it. But those relationships aren't forced. They become very good working relationships. And then that's when you're able to get more out of each other to where, maybe it's a rehab athlete that has to get rehabbed. It's a very comprehensive and, collaborative effort between the two versus it feels like it's forced. So there's kind of an unwillingness to work together and, it's a power struggle, whatever it is. It's always been a better product moving forward when there's a good relationship in place that was previously fostered just by having those conversations.
Yeah. What I'm getting from all this is we should try to systematize the things that are tedious and low skill in order to free up enough mental bandwidth and time to really attack the stuff that takes more, thinking power, stuff that you really want to dive into that can't be replicated from person to person. Everyone's going to have their own programming style, coaching style, whatnot. We want to kind of minimize the time we take on those menial tasks so that we can free up more time and energy for those tasks that we really want to sink our teeth into, as far as like really thinking deep about programming or really spending time around coaches and athletes to kind of build that relationship, or talking to other coaches about, what they think about stuff like that. And sometimes I feel like that takes a little bit longer than others as far as like building out those like systems. I guess I think about it like this way. Like, if it's something that's like easily repeatable that like almost anyone can do, probably want to try to systematize that, whether it's like, like sports science stuff with like creating reports. Okay, is there a way to use, AI? Check out our last episode to tune into that. Is there a way to use AI or some sort of like formula that you have all the information, you collected it? Is there a way to synthesize it a lot more quickly so that you can make an actionable decision, actionable reports off that, versus something like programming. Okay, I'm not just going to tell ChatGPT to write me a program because that's no fun, and I'm just stealing money at that point. I'm not actually doing my job. The one frees up time for the other, if that makes sense. So like stuff that's like easily repeatable and low skill, I would say you want to try to systematize. Stuff that requires higher skill and more like individual, thought, interpersonal thought, stuff that like a machine can't do. That's the stuff that you want to kind of systematize in order to have more time to really kind of sink your teeth into that type of stuff. And that could look different for different people, depending on what you have access to and, constraints.
If AI can do it, let AI do it.
Yeah.
But that's, kind of going back to our last conversation that we had in the last episode. The part when you're dealing with people, that's something that will never go away. And so that has to be, you have to have the autonomy for that, versus, cleaning up 18,000 lift cards or data entry or something like that. Cool. Yeah, immediately, if I'm thinking I have 400 lift cards and we just, maybe we got a workout delivery system, I'm looking at that going, which one of those has the top set? That's probably the most important data from those days, or the fastest set, or whatever it is, the best performance. And I want to make sure that that gets entered as quickly, as efficiently as possible. There you go. That's right there. That tells you everything you need to know about what things have to have a system, what things don't need to. And if you can use that as the frame of reference, I think everyone will be okay. Like when they think about having to systemize or just complete autonomy, do you build the wall for the brain to think inside of, or do you break it down and let them go free? But I do agree with you that sometimes if there's not a border for the mind to have to be in, it gets too far outreach and then nothing gets done.
Yeah, I agree. And I can think of like an example training wise, like was working with an athlete the other day, taking them through just like a essentially like movement restoration mobility sort of like session, just something quick. And we wanted him to have to do like, all right, went through everything that was prescribed, and then okay, let's just take 5 minutes at the end for you to explore any sort of movement you want. Just kind of like open it up, and kind of could tell he didn't really know where to start, just because, good example here, like there were no constraints, so it was just kind of like, oh damn, like I could literally do anything. It was just like kind of domed up. So I was like, okay, let me give him like one thing. Told him, okay, let's take this PVC, put it on your back. Let's try to touch the ground with the PVC in as many ways as possible. Any position, squatting, standing, just try to like kind of move your body in different ways to kind of flex, extend. And then all I had to tell him to do was that, like, hey, touch the PVC to the ground in any way you can. And that kind of like opened it up for him, versus like we just tell him, okay, do whatever you want, 5 minutes. He kind of defaulted to doing nothing because he's just like, oh fuck, like I just have no idea what to do.
What do I do?
Yeah, so I think even just giving someone like one, and this could be like a helpful exercise to do. Okay, build a, example. Make me a workout with only dumbbells, or make me a workout with you have these 3 pieces of equipment and nothing else. Make a workout with the options are endless, but 3 pieces of equipment, make me a full 4-week training program, go, something like that. So that could be like a helpful exercise to kind of just show you the power of like giving those constraints, and how that, like, you might think it stifles creativity, but I think it can actually boost it if you use it in the correct way.
Yeah. But this could probably lead pretty good to my topic that I suggested.
I think it does. Hadn't heard of it before you brought it up, so I'm ready to get educated on this one.
Education. So the Medici or the Medici, depends on how you want to say it. I'll say Medici for the point. Effect it's a concept it's coined by Franz Johansson in a book of the same name, but the idea behind it is that it comes from, and this is where I think it may be Medici. It comes from the Medici family of the Renaissance period in Florence, who they funded artists and scientists, philosophers, and artisans, bread makers, everything, and then they would bring them into a cohesive space. So they would bring everybody together, right? And it almost kind of doing like a thinking party in a sense, and everybody would start to talk, and none of these people are in related fields, which is the cool thing, so it's truly, we just want to have a place of learning and conversation. And what happened is everybody would have these extremely creative thoughts afterwards, and then it would boost the outputs of the scientists because they started to think in some areas a little bit more like a baker, or in other ways a winemaker, or a winemaker would start to think like a philosopher, and that would change what they were thinking. Basically, the entire idea is that they would bring in all these experts of the field, of their respective fields, and talk to other experts of their respective fields, and they would steal, whether it be systems, thought processes, whatever it is, ideas, and bring it back to their respective field to use this, right? And then it would just boost everything that they're doing, because now they're looking at this forest through a different lens, which I think is really cool, because that's kind of what we do here in our podcast 1,000 times over 1,000. We're not extreme intellectuals, but we want to read about them and then use their thoughts, or we hear something that we want to apply back. And it does help, because now we're looking at things from a different perspective, It's not just taking that 10,000 point view around the elephant, back to Mental Models Volume 1, but instead we're actually going around the side by the trunk or the tail and saying, oh, an elephant is a rope. No, an elephant is a wall. And by pulling all that together, it allows us to take that step back. But the other thing is really nice about this is that the scientists won't know to the bread maker what is an impossible thing, and they're going to go for it, right? Or vice versa. Or the linen maker will talk to a winemaker, or a philosopher will talk to who even knows at this point, whatever. But they won't know the personal limits of whatever that respective career field is, because they're not a genius or the expert, quote unquote, in that. So they're going to push the limits that you wouldn't have thought what was possible, and create new things. And it just kind of builds a giant space of a solution to whatever problems it may be, because you can pose these things and get this unfiltered opinion on it without having to think too much like the respective person. So, in a sense, when it comes to this, what's the closest thing we have in our space to that, right? And I don't think it's a conference, because everyone's going to feel like they want to be the expert of the mastery in there. And we're all in such a, whether you're in collegiate, high school, whatever, I still think it's all far too closely related, or had an experience at that one point during that, to not be far enough removed in order to give those kinds of types of answers.
To me, and this is something that I've kind of been preaching for a while, is the easiest way for anyone to do that is to read, and to read outside of your field. Like, I feel like reading in general is really good for you, but like a wide variety of books, whether that's, obviously you're going to read, if you're a strength coach, you're probably going to read, books on training. You're going to read books on, periodization, stuff like that. But then read books like, okay, the mental models. Those are really good books for anyone to read. There's a book called Thinking in Systems that's similar to that. That's really good to read. Read Robert Greene books, Mastery, 48 Laws of Power, Laws of Human Nature, stuff like that. Reading, even like novels, like around classic novels, Around the World in 80 Days, really good book by Jules Verne.
Moby Dick.
Fiction, yeah, fiction books. Like there's stuff, and this is something that if you would ask me 10 years ago, if okay, like you're gonna read fiction books and think that's gonna help you with your career, as a sports performance coach, I'd be like, no, that's stupid. But I think the more you read and the more you kind of mature, you tend to see things in all of those different topics that can kind of like relate back, and you can kind of like make those connections. So I think that's the biggest thing to me, is just like reading from a wide variety and just having, or it could be podcasts too. I think reading's probably my preferred mode of input. Obviously, having conversations with people outside of your field, I don't think that happens quite as much. Like I don't personally do that a ton, just because like you think you're at work most of the time. It's tough to do that. But if you have friends that are in completely different lines of work, if you want to talk to them about their work, when you're hanging out. But I think reading's kind of the biggest one for me, and just kind of like looking deeper into some of those topics instead of just thinking, strictly within your domain of whatever you do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
You got anything else on that? Like how can people, that's like
I
the number one for me. Obviously like podcasts, you can watch YouTube videos and stuff like that, but
it's far easier to get a I don't know if I'm just going to say this correctly, but get a single perspective that's different than yours nowadays, because the world is so connected. A phone call, a text message, a podcast, a TV show, a documentary, whatever it may be. I think that is a smaller version that can help get to the larger goal. I don't know if there's anything really to where, there's 50 people like that who all come together and have this. Maybe it's, and if it is, it's probably not focused or fixated on that. It's probably a men's retreat or something like that, to where you're going like, I don't
pay
want to go.
$10,000 to get
Yeah.
held under cold water for.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to do that. But I do think there's a lot to it. And reading is one of the big ones. That is 100% certain. And most of the time when you read, and you read outside of your field, everybody kind of shits on like a self-help book or whatever it is. But I think a lot of that isn't any book can be self-help. So I hate the idea or the construct that this is a self-help book. Now, we're not going out to read, how to be more confident in 10 steps and shit like that. But you're thinking about mental heuristics or, just different, thinkers. I think that's an important category of books to read that kind of break the bounds of what you might be doing. Anyone can go read Triphasic or Super Training and get the rough ideas of the X's and O's. But what led those people to think of those ideas? What had them think in those capacities? And I think getting to the root of those is important for people to have a bigger thought process, and vice versa. How many coaches read a book on maybe finance?
They should.
It's
I'd start
numbers, and
reading a
it's
book on finance.
I saw that. I'm really interested in that book, to be honest. I want to hear
Really
about
good
that.
book.
But what is finance? It's numbers, it's predictive values, it's essentially systems in place to create those predictive values and make the best educated guess in order to get the highest return on investment. What is half of the job in sports performance? It's numbers, it's making predictive values and decisions to get the highest return on your investment. The only difference is the investment is the time you spend and the exercise you select. So it's very similar in those things. But if you ask a strength coach to start analyzing numbers, and they look at this person and they're going to go, why are you not buying this? And they're going to say, well, at the field, there's not a lot of general concise goodwill towards the stock, so we just don't think it's going to be there. It's like, yeah, but the numbers are there. That's what makes sense. And vice versa, if you come and you bring, a finance bro who's in the back office at JP Morgan, not getting in trouble for it, but he comes over and he starts looking at your data and he's like, why are you doubling down on this if you've already got this covered? And you just kind of sit there and you go, well, we need it. And he's going to say, but why do you need that if your requisite is X and you've hit X by, day 3? You don't need to hit that for 5 days, right? And it's going to make them kind of stop, think, and be like, well, what if my training economy's off and I'm not spending as much time on things that can be providing value that are already providing value? Same thing. I think there's not enough of that. And I just don't know. I think a lot of it comes down to, and maybe this whole episode today is based on relationships, but I don't know if enough strength coaches have friends that aren't strength coaches. I think that's a big thing. So some of my best friends, they don't work. I mean, maybe they'll work in coaching and volunteer. And, I have 2 friends, both, one is in, marketing, one is in finance and in insurance, but they're not going to, they understand coaching, a lot of what I do because they were both athletes, but their area of expertise is outside of that. So it provides a fresh perspective on any problems that you may have and vice versa. Things like that, or having friends that are, I have a friend that's a lawyer, but he's really into law, but his passion is more into music and he enjoys that. So he sees the more artistic lens. So when you talk to him, his opinion is vastly different than, the more, I guess, black and white that we see for the most part in objective points of view. He's far more into the gray and figuring that out. So it provides a fresh, nuanced perspective on things that you may be looking at. I don't know if enough people in general nowadays have a wide enough, circle to be outside of their circle of competency. I think their friendship circles are within their circle of competency, and it creates that echo chamber versus differences in opinions or fresh viewpoints. And I think that makes it tough, Like off the top of your head right now, do you think you have like 5 people very close to you in your life that are vastly different in opinions, in careers, in ideologies? I think that's a good question to ask. Like anyone who's listening is like, just ask yourself that. Or is everybody, not necessarily an exact 1-to-1 clone, but we're all similar and we all have the same job. And that's nature of the beast. Like you're going to gravitate towards people with the similar interests and everything. But to kind of like break those confines down and like understand that there's a lot more out there that you can be learning from just in daily conversations.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know if I have that, like 5 people. I definitely have people that are close to me that have way different like backgrounds and stuff like that, but most of them are performance coaches, so that we're very similar in that aspect. Yeah. Long story short, I have no friends.
But like, I think it's important. And I think seeking mentorship is a good thing too. We always typically we gravitate towards the mentorship in our field, and I have mentors that are strength coaches that are very important to me. But I have met, and luckily enough, I have obviously team builder, but I have mentors in the business world, and I've pulled so much from one to the other and vice versa. That has really helped me think, quote unquote, like more groundbreaking than what you would typically see in those respective fields, because I'm able to pull from the other world and that other career to be able to like be fruitful there. And sometimes it's really good to think like a businessman and make a business decision in sports performance. And sometimes in business, it's really good to think like a coach, especially in the unique company that I work with, to where like that's vastly important, is to understand and be able to use that information. But I think it's really good. And getting a mentor outside of the field as maybe just a personal one, like it's not super hard. It's as simple as, having a conversation with somebody and say, I'd love to learn from you. Obviously, you don't want to like just be completely like a leech and steal all their time. But if you can, provide something of value to them, it's like, hey, I would love to, and I think it's very important to have directed questions too. versus like going into this, if you have an hour with them and they're willing to give it to you, instead of going, okay, teach me everything you know, write
Yeah, you
down
should
10.
prepare a little bit.
Yeah, prepare, understand, do your research on that person, come to them with, maybe 10 directed questions that you can spend 5 minutes on each, and try to really understand what you want out of that conversation and what they can offer. And as they're talking, like absorbing and being a sponge, I think Coach DeMarco had one on, it was more training, but it was being the sponge, not the brick. A brick doesn't absorb water, but a sponge does, right? In the sense of maybe not being the sponge on, what you're training and absorbing the training, but the information, be the sponge.
Mm.
Really try to absorb that information, because it can be valuable that you may not use it in the next 5 years, but 10 years down the line, if you're a director, or, you own your own business and you own your own gym, you might apply that information and then look back at that and go, oh, wow, that was something that was monumental. I can't believe it. And then that's when you're going to have that aha moment. Maybe text that person and say, hey, just want you to know, it took me 10 years, but I finally used this and it paid off, and that might lead to the next conversation. And maintaining those relationships is fairly important as well. And I think that's something I'm terrible at.
Yeah, I can definitely get better at that too. Just remembering to kind of keep in touch with people. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
everyone can say they're busy, and we all are to an extent. But yeah, definitely something I can get better at too. One thing that I really like that you said is people from other fields don't know like what's possible and what's impossible in these other fields. So they're like, well, why don't try it like this way? And I think sometimes we can kind of get unenamored with some stuff because we're like, oh, like we assume because we've tried this one time or tried it a few times, it just didn't work out, that it's like, okay, that just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Versus, okay, I just probably didn't try it the right way. And there are some
Mm-hmm.
stuff that's like just probably not going to happen. Like, okay, like I'm not going to put on like, you know, if someone says, well, why not just like sprint every single day? Sprinting's really good. It's like, okay, that's probably one where it's like, okay, maybe not. But I think that kind of there's there's a term for, I believe it's like a Japanese or like a Buddhist term, and essentially translates to like beginner's mind. And it's like really important in Buddhism. I can't remember the exact term, but it essentially translates to like beginner's mind, and how like it's super important, within Buddhism, and how this can like translate over to your life. To
Shoshin.
all Shoshin, yeah. So essentially always looking at things with a sense of like, oh, like curiosity and just beginner's mind, being willing to learn as much as you can, being the sponge, not the brick, and kind of keeping that, over time. Because I think over time that's just kind of generally goes away for a lot of people. And it makes sense. Like you accumulate more knowledge, you accumulate more skill. It's a little bit harder to be kind of that beginner. And I think people's, our egos play into that as well, especially like we get into like higher up positions, people kind of expect more of us. It takes some humility to kind of have that beginner's mind and kind of admit like, okay, like let me approach this as if I know next to nothing. And maybe that's another really helpful exercise. Like, hey, like pretend like you know nothing about your job. Just observe and kind of like what would you do to, accomplish the task at hand. Maybe that can give you a fresh perspective.
I think so. I think there's another piece to this that you don't realize how much you just did with this, but like just learning of other cultures, right?
It's true.
Like you just talked about this, and that there was so much to learn from just this one single thing, you know, and not to stay on the Japanese train, but like there's I think it's Shinsogi or Shinsugi, or Kintsugi, that's what it is, where it's like the broken pottery fixed with gold,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
And it becomes a more beautiful piece when it's done. It's never just throw it away. It's salvage, repair, and you'll have a better product, right? And you know, I think it's the most widely used analogy from Japan, especially in America, is that if it's not broken, it's just new. And there's a beauty in failure. And I think a lot of that, especially in like the beginner's mind, like you just addressed there, is that by having the beginner's mind and that curiosity, you're a little bit more okay with failure versus as we get deeper and deeper into our careers, we get so failure or risk averse because we want to maintain that the idea that that we have the mastery and this expertise, that we're akin to being very like averse to failure. Whereas even the best out there, we look at these monumental figures within sports performance. You look at a Charlie Francis, you look at a Jay Schrader, anyone out there, those types of people they'll, even, Boo Schexner, he's going to tell you how he failed and how he had to change and how that changed his entire outlook and his ideologies. Those people are really good at that. So I think like by having that kind of mindset too, alongside the beginner's mindset, will greatly improve the next thinking. But all in all, just to say, like, there's even so much to learn from just seeing or reading of current things that are out there that just aren't in our daily lives, and broadening our horizons on that front.
Yeah, I liken it to like investing. Typically, when people are younger, they're more risky with their investments. They have like a longer timeline. And as we get older, we become a little more risk averse. We want to play a little more safe, and we kind of do the same thing with our thinking in a way. When we're young, it's like nothing to lose. We're willing to kind of fail and be wrong all the time. And then as we get older, that kind of goes away. And I don't think it needs to. I think that should go away a little bit naturally because you're accumulating more knowledge and wisdom, not because you're consciously choosing to do so because, okay, my ego is getting in the way. I'm older. I should know better. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're getting deep here.
The younger you are, the more likely you are to go for broke because you have less to lose, and you're more aggressive in that tactic, whether it be with investing or in your career, whatever it is. Versus once you become established, there's more to lose in that, and
Mm-hmm.
when you start, the only thing you have to lose is your pride, for the most part.
Right. And I think
and,
there's a
and if
difference
you,
between being like frivolous with your with your decisions in that
yeah,
regard and just like
you obviously don't want to make an idiotic decision, but you also have more context with life, with your career, in order to make a relatively risky decision versus something that would have been risky at the start and now. The risk changes on what you have, but you also have more context around it in order to make the informed risky decision.
right. And
Hmm.
another thing that I'm thinking of too is like, and you can read about these people, you can listen to podcasts, but studying, just like one thing I like to do is like learn about. It's usually like entrepreneurs or people that like the Elon Musks of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world, people usually from other fields, but they're well known by pretty much everybody. Study like their habits, the way they think about things, the way they approach things, and you probably won't do things exactly like them, but I think you can take a lot of stuff from them. I know we've talked about the Founders podcast. It's a really good podcast that we would recommend. There's You can kind of just like see how these people think, how they approach work. I think it was Mark Zuckerberg got offered like at least $1 billion, if not multiple billions of dollars to sell Facebook like way back in the day, and he like turned it down. He was like in his early 20s at that point, like didn't even think about it. Could have sold it right there, not have had to work for the rest of his life, but just like people like that who are the 1% of the 1%, like I think you can learn a lot from them, what to do and equally like what not to do. Read a book about Cornelius, had a story about Cornelius Vanderbilt, the
Hmm.
Commodore. This is like he was essentially like the richest man in the world during his time. I think equated to today's dollar. I think his fortune amassed around like what would have been $300 billion in today's money. This is the guy that, I think he was big with like the railroad system. That's why he made a lot of his money. Created Vanderbilt University. If you've ever heard of that, still there today in Nashville. And essentially, talking about what not to do. So he left this whatever $300 billion in today's money fortune to his, to his heirs, and essentially within 100 years, it was all gone because they were just like spending, one, you can take that as two different things of not to do. One, maybe not, leave, your kids or whatever with that much money, because then they can do whatever they want and just sit on their ass and not work. And two, not to spend money like those people. So you can equally find like what to do and what not to do from those people. Really good decisions and really bad decisions. You can take lessons from either of them.
Absolutely. When you're thinking of, there's so much to be done, and Vanderbilt was, quote unquote, a really good leader, right? I think that's good leadership qualities will be transferable from the bottom up. When I say this, that if you're great at what you do in your entry level gig, but you exhibit leadership qualities, we talk about getting promoted to your level of incompetency. Shout out, God, that was probably 10 episodes ago, but great episode. But when we talk about this, it's that ceiling is a lot higher, and you're able to positively affect others around you and those beneath you far over. And Simon Sinek, for anyone who doesn't know who that is, he's a fantastic author, businessman, everything. And he's a great thinker. You've probably seen him on Instagram. He's a kind of a nerdier looking guy, dark hair, slick back, glasses, incredibly strong jawline. But he always talks about leadership. He actually wrote the book Leaders Eat Last, right? And a lot of his stuff talks about how a leader fosters the team around them and puts the team before them, right? Which is like the main basis of the book, Leaders Eat Last. And it's, do you bring that sense of security to foster an environment to where the people beneath you that you might be in charge of, whether you're a manager or in military, whatever it is, that you can create those, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, you can create these walls for them to just think very freely in and be very fruitful in their endeavors? Or do you become a very selfish leader and it's about you and how you want the credit versus you put the onus on them to take the credit because you're having the implied credit and finding the value of, it's less about this system wouldn't run without me. And it's more of my value is inherently that I can build leadership around me and build teams that will be more productive, that even when I'm gone, couple good burps, but that when I'm gone,
Oh, really?
when I'm gone, I think it was good. It's worth it. That's the show. But that when I'm gone, that this will be good even after I leave. But people get nervous about that of, well, if I'm not directly having my fingers in the pie, will I don't provide value anymore. It's like, no, that's when you go to the next one and build the next thing. That's your value. I mean, personally, that's something I struggled with for a long time, was getting out of the system to work on the system, or getting out of the weeds to take a look at the field, whatever analogy you want to make.
Yeah, it's kind of like the analogy people say, like the business owner goes from working in the business to working on the business, is the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah. But I think having that skill set will set you up for the next thing. And, maybe this leads into this last topic that we have here, but it's like, if you have that skill set, and even as an assistant coach or an associate director, assistant director, can you help the interns, the GAs, the part-timers, the whoever grow to set yourself up with that skill set to become a director? And then once you become the director, bleeding directly into the next topic, my conversational skills are impeccable right now. When you become the director, what's the first 3 steps that you take?
I
You
think
know?
for me they're similar to, one would be getting the systems in place, like we talked about. Systems in place. I think before that, I think you have to assess the staff. I think like if you're inheriting, it's different if you're inheriting a staff versus you're like you get to hire
Hiring.
everyone. Yeah, if you're inheriting the staff, okay, you don't want to just go in there guns ablazing and fire everybody. Bad move. But you do want to make like assessments, and obviously it's going to vary depending on what your level of like authority is. Like, are you able to kind of like hire people as you see fit, or is it kind of like, okay, these people are all on contracts, you can't just like go in there and fire them right away if you do think that's the best decision for the staff. But you want to assess the staff. Okay, do they fit what I'm trying to do here? Do they fit like the philosophy that I want to build within this department or organization? I think you definitely want to assess that, and I think that kind of goes with just like, hey, like, you don't need to like interview them like formally, but like, hey, just kind of get to know them and see what they're about. And I think if you think they're a good fit, you can keep them. And if not, I think there's a good and a bad way to go about that conversation. I think you definitely want to like, hey, like, because you got to understand too, if they don't kind of align what you want to do, they're also not going to be happy in that job over time too. So
Yeah.
I think you do want to try to help them as much as possible get to a, like, if that place isn't for them anymore, try to help them find another place that is for them. Don't just leave them high and dry. So assessing the staff for sure, I think, is number one, because that's like the people are going to be the most important part of the job. If the team isn't like, if it's not a good team culture, how is it going to be? How is that going to extrapolate to the actual teams, the actual athletes, the actual, sport coaches? So I think that's number one. Assess the staff, get everyone on the same page as far as like terminology, get those systems in place so that you can kind of take care of the menial tasks that are low skill, but if you don't do them will come back to bite you in the ass. Getting those in place, and then really I think before it even comes down to like the programming and teams, it's just like the relationships with whether it's coaches or like if you're in pro sports, like front office stuff like that. Obviously you're going to like want to focus on running good programs and whatnot, but I think coming out, and I'm fresh off starting DeMarco's book, so I'm stealing this one, but coming in with like an open mind and like trying to make sure everyone in the building kind of like knows your name and has like a good like first impression of you, and continuing to build that reputation over time. I think if you have that on a good level, everything else is more likely to kind of fall into place. Um, that's my best guess. I'm obviously not a director, but someday that's the goal.
I
You've been a
think,
director before, technically.
yeah, technically.
So what were your first 3 moves, and what would you do differently now? Obviously, you were in a little bit different sector, a
My
unique.
first, yeah, it was a unique position, and I had worked there already and been promoted to a director. But one of the first things I did was in a staff meeting, my first staff meeting after getting the job. They didn't have the assistants in the staff meeting. They only had the director. Um, my first couple of questions was just like, what's the expectation of, like, what do you guys see as valuable from that portion, and understanding that. I think that was huge, because some people are like, well, I want you to help me develop them. And other people are like, I need you to stay out of my way, and having that clarity provides, the construct of what you can and can't really do. Obviously you do what you find is the best interest of the athletes, but to a certain extent, like, if it's going to be a conflict, is maintaining the relationship and giving them what they believe to be seen fit, or are you opening the door to become quote unquote, the scapegoat when the season's not great for that respective team. I think understanding that is very important. I didn't have staff at the time, so my next move was immediately, let's get a job posting, let's get interviews. I need to get at least one staff member. At the time it was 380 plus athletes. I needed some kind of help in order to not be just, only on the floor 24/7. I need to be able to see things and kind of move around and kind of do that. And then step 3 was establish how I wanted to train and figure out the pitfalls of the facility that I was in, but also like what was beneficial, right? I didn't have a lot of equipment. I had, 2 double-sided racks, one set of dumbbells up to 50 pounds, a couple med balls, but I had a ton of floor space, So what was valuable? The hops, the skips, the jumps. We could do a lot of like movement, like true movement in 3-dimensional, like sprinting, braking, all that kind of stuff, jumping. So that helped formulate the programming that I did. Whereas, the older they got, obviously we used quote unquote more advanced principles using like 5-3-1 or different progressions, starting strength to get there. And then a lot of the younger kids, it was very basic. It was, 1x20 and, principles just to get them constantly moving. I had the younger kids, 4 times a week. So I could just address that and build strength over and over and over again. It's like, hey, fill out your card, see what you did last time. I need you to, if you got 20 reps, you're going to raise 5 pounds. If you don't get 20 reps today, that's the next weight you're going to use next time. And, that allowed a system in place to happen where they came in. I had their packets, handed them out, go through the warm up, all that. Differently now, partly because of a different system. I think like I would love to stay in like a college system if I were to go be a director or at a professional level. The first thing I think I would still do is I would go meet with the coaches and, those above me and those laterally, and establish that relationship but again, the expectations of what I think is best for their teams, but also what they perceive as best for their teams. Is my role very secondary and just a support role? And it's literally just make sure they're strong enough to not get hurt. Do they want to improve the athleticism? Where did not necessarily looking at it and going, what did the last person do super wrong? But like traditionally, what do you find leads to the worst outcomes? Getting those opinions that can help that. It also provides like a good level of understanding to the individuals that I'm there to help them, establishes a good relationship and a good rapport that you can build off of later. I still think that's number 1 because as much as we like to not think it is, it's so big on relationships that I think that's super important. I would probably do number 2 as assess the staff while building systems. Everyone thinks, you come in, you can just change the world and this and that and the other. I think there has to be, 1 to 2 weeks of you're there probably more than anybody else watching your staff sessions. Where do you see pitfalls? Where do you see that there's room for development? And then having those conversations with them about developing. And then if they don't see it fit that they want to, and, maybe they have their trudging feet and they don't want to change, that's when like how you mentioned, you kind of move them on to somewhere else where maybe they are a better fit. You don't want to just fire somebody and be like, yeah, you get out of here. Hopefully that's the last resort. They can either build and grow and develop to, where you might want to take the organization, or you can get them placed somewhere that's going to make them happy. But if, they're just very belligerent on it, that's when it would probably be like, this is going to be a bigger problem than anything else. While you build your systems in place of, okay, we're going to change our language because language matters. We're going to develop, this is how we run our exercises. And I think like having an establishment of principles as a department is very good. Maybe your ground-based movement and maybe you're more 3-dimensional and you want to use 60% of your training economy on field work. So that becomes part of everyone's program because you see value in that and that's where you want to do it. I think establishing those kind of like set system and rules and, like I said, the principles in place in order to get there, while you evaluate the staff and who may be in, who may be out, and that kind of thing. Those are pretty important. And then the last thing I would say is maybe not establishing the system itself, but figuring out what the best way in order, once you've met with everybody, you've seen your team, you've seen everything, creating an environment with set standards, I think is important too. Whether it be for learning, whether it be for interactions, programming, whatever it is, but establishing that, because it's kind of twofold and it sounds very negative, but if you never tell somebody the standard, they can't meet it or fall below it.
Yep.
But if you establish that, hey, this is what we do, this is how we're going to do it, I want you to be on board and I'm here to help you. If it's tough and you can't figure it out, maybe that's its own thing. But once that's set, and it's been verbalized and spoken and written or whatever it is, you're able to hold people to that standard. And it becomes a lot easier of, hey, I'm maybe, whatever the conversation is, I'm obsessed with these standards. This is what I want us to hit. This is how we do this. I want us to be the best. If we're going to be the best, this is how I see us getting there. And you have somebody who's constantly falling behind. And then when you go to have the conversation of, hey, we're going to move on without you. I can help you get another job, whatever it is, but I think you should start looking. I'll give you a good recommendation, but whatever that may be, you can't have that conversation if somebody doesn't know, hey, I'm blowing it. So I think that's a very important thing to do as well, in that first 3 steps in the process.
I agree. That's one that I know that's important, but I completely blanked on. And obviously it's important for both staff and athletes, but I think I would almost say more important. They're both super important, almost more important for the staff, because obviously we think about developing athletes, but we also need to develop the staff, because the staff is who's directly impacting the athletes. Can't have one without the other. And you can't blame someone for not meeting a standard that you didn't tell them about in the first place. I think that's super important. You can't blame someone for not doing something if they didn't know that was what was expected of them from day one.
Exactly. And it's hard to undo that once it hasn't been done.
Yeah,
so it becomes, you got to jump
right away.
It's the same thing as when every year, the first year I when I moved there, I missed the first 2 days. So I kind of hit the ground running and just kind of going, and had to, take the lump on the chin as I went. But after that, I met with our ATs on staff, and we start the first lift of every year with each team that I personally oversee is, hey, this is the standard. These are the rules. This is what is allowed, what is not allowed. And it makes that conversation way easier, because when they do break that rule, you're very simply hey, I said no phones in the weight room. Go put it away, or whatever it is. Every kid wants to have their phone, but whatever that may be, you're able to rely back on that, because you've set the precedent of, you can't say you didn't know, because I know for a fact I told you. So it makes that conversation a lot easier. It makes you also less of an asshole in their mind and more of a, hey, these are the rules. We're sticking to it.
Another thing too, I think, is you mentioned meeting with everybody and knowing okay, what went well, what didn't go well. I think another big thing is knowing what standards you need to uphold from those who are above you. What are you being know what you're being evaluated on. Because if you don't know what you're being evaluated on, if you don't know what a job well done is, then it's pretty freaking hard to do it. It's hard to
how
you're doing your job.
How are you supposed to do a good job?
Yeah, how are you supposed to do a good job if you don't know what a good job is? And that's probably a little bit different for every place. Some teams, that might be strictly winning games, don't care about anything else. If you win, you do your job. If you're not, that's a lot of how it is for sport coaches often. If you're winning, you're doing your job. If you're not winning, you're not doing your job. For us, it's maybe, okay, our injury rates were really high the last few years. We really want to see that go down. We want to see that go down by 7 to 10% by the end of, 2 years from now. We'll give you it's not going to be immediate, but 2 years from now, we want to see that dip under X percent. We need player availability to go up. We want, we feel like we're slower than, most of the teams in the conference. We need objective data to say that these guys have gotten faster at the end of, a 1 year period. If you know what those are, it's a lot easier to kind of, okay, like, here's the goal. Let's work backwards from there. What do I need to kind of address to show that, okay, I'm doing my job?
It also, I mean, conversations like that, they lead to who else you should believe you should be talking to, right? Say it's the injury conversation. We've had too many injuries. Okay, well then you go have when you're done with that conversation, you go down, you go talk to the ATs. Hey, talk to, so and so. Talk about injuries being a big issue. What were the leading, soft tissue injuries, or was it very contact based? Was it bone injuries? What was our biggest ones, right? And you almost form a different needs analysis of that team versus just the sport itself, but that team in the sport based off of the current system, where you can then formulate your programming in order to address, right? We can't always just reduce all risk of injury, but we can mitigate the occurrences of certain ones based off of how we train. It also helps you with your budget. Maybe that you have $8,000 of budget a year. What were they spending that budget on before? Hey, we aren't fast enough. Are they tracking speed? Do they have timing gates? Do they have GPS? Are they even tracking speed in the weight room? Do they have VBT units? If the speed wasn't the emphasis and something worthy of being a KPI that you could track consistently, but they're telling you that they're slow, we were missing the bill. Now I know that budget wise, I know I have X amount of dollars in order to accommodate this. That's what I'm going to do. Right. It helps form those other decisions by having those conversations as well, outside of just the training itself, but all the other little things. Maybe the conversation is, well, it's nutrition. And you go back and maybe you're at a P4 school and you look at the nutrition, station, and there's protein shakes for everybody. There's, smoothies after that are, dialed in on their nutrition. So what is it? Do they not feel like it's available enough, or do they just not like the flavor and the variety? Right. And if it becomes the flavor and the variety, then you have a conversation with, the team captains. It's like, what would you like to see? Okay. Well, now that I have this, I can take that with the nutritionist, be the middleman, and say, hey, it's not that they don't think that they're getting quality nutrition. They don't like how it tastes. Is there another option that's very similar that they might like better? Boom. And stuff like that can be very quick wins that also creates like super good buy-in, because they see that you have like their best interest and their thoughts and their opinions in mind as well. You may not always take it. You don't always have to. But having those allows also someone just to feel like there is like that platform to be able to have that conversation.
100%. Man, I think that's a great way to wrap up.
It's a great place to end.
That was,
absolutely
that was a banger. Yeah. I don't know if I need to rank this again. It's damn good though. Just
banger.
Just know it's. Yeah, I was just know it's damn good. If we're going, what is it? What do we go? S tier? Is it S, A, B, C? Yeah, this is definitely like not an S tier drink, because I'm gonna be pretty stringent on that, but I do think it's like between like a B plus, A minus. C4. I was
gonna say it's probably a high B.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'll probably put it in B tier. So really solid. It's definitely one of the green apple Jolly Rancher is definitely up there for my favorite C4. That cherry cola, Casey's exclusive, that one might be my favorite, but it's not widely available.
I'm still so mad I never got a hold of it.
Got to come to Casey's. Get you that and a breakfast pizza.
I was stuck next to Casey's for a week in Lexington, Kentucky, and they never put it on the shelf. But I did get a breakfast pizza. That was so worth it. You have to.
Yeah, it's a must.
Diet Coke as a no-calorie drink. As a pop, it's up there. It's at least A tier. I love a DC. Yep. Love a screaming cold fridge sig. But as always, everybody, we enjoyed this. We enjoy having you listen to us. Make sure you rate, follow, subscribe to us on all the social platforms. Give us a like on Instagram. Rate us, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's like our biggest platform that we love it. Spotify, full video available on Spotify. Apple Podcasts on there as well. It's incredible. It's a great time. Follow us on Instagram. Like everything in there. Our personal socials are always attached to those Bev Boys clips. Definitely go to bevboys.com, pick up a t-shirt, pick up a hat, whatever it may be. When you do, send us a picture. I'll put you up on the show. We'd love to see a double thumbs up or having, you crushing a little bevy during this. Send us a picture of it. Be happy for it. Other than that, thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.